Back in my mid-20s, I had just moved to a small mountain town for work. It was beautiful but isolating, so I turned to a dating app to meet new people. That's how I connected with Jake. Jake seemed like the perfect mix of laid-back and adventurous. His profile was full of photos of him kayaking, hiking, and camping. He had that scruffy outdoorsy look I liked: flannel shirts, messy hair, a crooked smile. We started chatting, and he seemed friendly, funny, and charming. After a week of back-and-forth messages, he suggested meeting up for coffee. I was nervous but excited. We decided to meet at a popular cafe in town. When he showed up, he was even better looking in person, but there was something about his energy that felt off. He was overly enthusiastic, leaning in too close, and his laugh seemed forced. Still, I chalked it up to first date jitters. We ordered coffee and sat by the window, chatting about our lives. Jake talked a lot about his love for the outdoors and mentioned a cabin his family owned, tucked away deep in the forest. He said it was his happy place, and casually threw out an invitation for me to visit sometime. It felt fast, but I figured he was just being friendly. After about an hour, the cafe started to get crowded, and Jake suggested we go for a drive to a spot where we could really talk. He promised to show me a beautiful lookout point not far from town. I hesitated but agreed, thinking it sounded innocent enough. As we drove, the atmosphere began to change. At first, Jake was talkative, sharing stories about his hiking adventures, but then he grew quiet. He kept glancing at me out of the corner of his eye, almost like he was sizing me up. The road started to narrow and the trees on either side thickened, making it feel like we were heading deep into nowhere. I casually asked, "How much farther is it?" "Not too far," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Something felt wrong. The road was becoming rougher, more like a trail than a street. My stomach tightened as I realized I had no idea where we were. I tried to stay calm and make light conversation, but Jake's responses became shorter, almost dismissive. Finally, the car came to a stop in front of a small clearing, and Jake turned off the engine. "We're here," he said, gesturing toward the woods. I looked around. There was no lookout point, just dense trees and the faint sound of a creek nearby. My pulse quickened. "This isn't what I was expecting," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Jake leaned back in his seat and smiled. "Trust me, it's better. Come on, I'll show you." Every instinct in my body screamed, "Don't get out of the car," but I also didn't want to provoke him. "I actually just remembered. I have to pick up a call for work," I said, pulling my phone out of my bag. Jake's expression darkened. "No signal out here," he said, almost smugly. That's when I noticed his phone sitting in the cup holder. It had full bars. I felt trapped. My heart pounded as I scanned the clearing for an escape route. "You okay?" he asked, his tone suddenly too casual. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "I think I'm getting a headache, though. Maybe we can come back another time." He stared at me for a long moment, then finally said, "All right, I'll drive you back." Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Instead of turning the car around, Jake started driving deeper into the woods. "I know a quicker way back," he said. My stomach dropped. I gripped my phone tightly, pretending to scroll through it while texting my location to a friend. "Actually, can we just head back the way we came?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. Jake didn't answer. The tension in the car was suffocating. Finally, we reached a fork in the trail, and I spotted a small hunting cabin in the distance. Jake slowed down. "Just need to grab something real quick," he said. "No, I really need to get home," I said firmly. For the first time, Jake looked annoyed. He turned off the car and reached for the door handle. "Wait," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'm not feeling well. Please just take me back." Jake froze, his hand still on the handle. For a moment, I thought he was going to get out anyway, but then he let out a short laugh. All right, he said, putting the car in reverse. The ride back to town felt like an eternity. Jake's charm was completely gone, replaced by silence and the occasional glance my way. When we finally pulled into the cafe parking lot, I didn't wait for the car to stop fully before opening the door. "Thanks for the drive," I said quickly, slamming the door behind me. Jake didn't respond. He just stared at me, his expression blank as I walked toward my car. I blocked his number that night and deleted the app. A week later, I saw a news report about a missing woman. Her photo flashed across the screen, and my blood ran cold. She had gone missing after meeting a man on a dating app. The last place she was seen? A cabin in the woods. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to invite a stranger from a dating app into my home, but after months of loneliness, I convinced myself it was harmless. His name was Ethan, charming, polite, and funny in our chats. We had talked for weeks, and he seemed different from the usual guys online. When he suggested coming over for dinner, I hesitated, but eventually agreed. I figured a homemade meal was more personal than another loud, crowded restaurant. Ethan arrived right on time. Tall, well-dressed, carrying a bottle of wine. He seemed perfect. We talked easily over dinner, laughing about awkward first dates and sharing stories about our jobs. He worked in marketing, or so he said. The conversation flowed, but looking back, I realized he asked more questions than he answered. At the time, I was just happy to have company. After dinner, we moved to the couch to watch a movie. I excused myself to the bathroom for a few minutes. When I came back, Ethan was scrolling through his phone. Everything seemed normal, but then subtle things started to feel off. The throw blanket I always kept folded on the armrest was draped over the couch. A kitchen drawer I hadn't opened was slightly ajar. My bedroom door, which I knew I had closed, was cracked open. I brushed it off. Maybe I had left the blanket out earlier. Maybe I hadn't closed the door completely. I didn't want to seem paranoid. Ethan noticed my distraction. "Everything okay?" he asked, smiling. "Yeah, just tired," I lied. He left around midnight after thanking me for dinner. I locked the door behind him and leaned against it, finally feeling alone again. But the silence in my apartment wasn't comforting. It was heavy, uneasy. I checked the front door again. Locked. Windows? Locked. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I decided to double-check the apartment. Walking into the kitchen, I noticed the back door, the one that leads to the tiny, barely used patio, was unlocked. I was sure I hadn't touched it in days. My stomach dropped. I locked it quickly, telling myself I must have forgotten. Then in the hallway, I saw it. My closet door was open just a crack. I always kept it closed, always. My breath caught in my throat. Slowly, I reached for the doorknob, heart pounding. I yanked it open. Nothing. Just coats and old boxes. I laughed nervously, scolding myself. I was being ridiculous. Still, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining sounds, soft creaks, a faint rustling. I left the light on and eventually drifted off. The next morning, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. A coffee mug, one I hadn't used in weeks, was sitting on the counter. There was a lipstick stain on the rim. I don't wear lipstick. I tore through the apartment in a panic, checking every closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. But the mug, I couldn't explain that. I called a friend and begged to stay at her place for a few nights. Before leaving, I checked the small security camera I had installed months ago by the front door, just to be safe. There was Ethan, leaving the apartment, but he wasn't alone. 2 minutes before they left, a woman slipped out of the hallway, following him closely. She had been inside the whole time. I moved out 2 weeks later. I never heard from Ethan again, and I never invite strangers over anymore. When I was 24, I decided to try online dating for the first time. My friends had been hyping it up, saying it was a great way to meet people outside of the small circle I'd grown up with. After a few awkward matches, I connected with Elliot, a professional photographer. His profile was full of stunning pictures of cityscapes, wildlife, and candid portraits. He seemed creative and intriguing, someone who had a passion for his work. We started chatting, and his messages were warm and thoughtful. He asked me about my favorite places, what I liked to do, and even about my childhood. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. After a few days of texting, Elliot suggested we meet for coffee. I was nervous, but agreed. We chose a quaint cafe in a bustling part of the city, public, safe, and bright. When I arrived, Elliot was already there, setting up a vintage camera on the table. He was tall, with messy brown hair and a soft smile that put me at ease. The conversation flowed easily. He told me stories about his travels and his love for capturing hidden beauty in the world. Then he said, "You have a really unique face. I'd love to photograph you sometime." I laughed, brushing it off as a compliment, but he didn't let it go. "No, I'm serious," he said. "There's something about you. You'd be perfect for a project I'm working on." I wasn't a model by any means, but the idea flattered me. After some hesitation, I agreed to meet him the following weekend at his studio, which he said was in a repurposed warehouse downtown. The day of the shoot, I almost canceled. Something about going to a private studio with a man I barely knew felt off, but I convinced myself I was being paranoid. I texted a friend my location before heading out, just to be safe. The warehouse was in a quiet part of the city, the kind of place where the streets feel deserted even during the day. The building was old, with tall windows covered in dust. Elliot met me outside and led me in, chatting about the lighting and props he had set up. The studio itself was small and cluttered, filled with old cameras, backdrops, and random props like antique chairs and mirrors. "You'll love this," he said, guiding me to a corner where a single chair sat under a hanging light. The shoot started out fine. Elliot gave clear directions, snapping pictures and adjusting the light. But then his instructions started to feel odd. "Can you tilt your head down, like you're hiding? Perfect. Now pull your hair across your face like a veil." I complied, but unease was creeping in. "Close your eyes." Imagine you're scared but trying to stay calm, he said, his voice almost a whisper. My heart skipped. Why scared? I asked, forcing a laugh. It's for the mood, he said, snapping more photos. You're doing great. I started to notice other things. The studio door was closed and locked. The windows were covered with thick black curtains blocking out the light. Then he said, let's try something different. Lie on the floor like you're sleeping, or maybe like you're unconscious. That was my breaking point. I think I'm done for today, I said, sitting up. Elliot frowned, lowering the camera. We're just getting to the good part. I'm not comfortable, I said firmly, standing up. He blocked my path to the door, his tone shifting. You're overreacting. This is art. Don't ruin it. My pulse raced. Move, I said, louder this time. He stared at me for a long moment before stepping aside. I grabbed my bag and bolted out the door, not looking back until I was on the main street. That night, I deleted the app and blocked Elliot's number. A few weeks later, I stumbled across his Instagram page. It was filled with photos of other women, photos eerily similar to the ones he had taken of me. In some, the women looked nervous, their eyes wide. In others, they were lying on the floor, limp and pale. I reported the account, but I never found out what happened to him. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that I narrowly escaped something far worse than a bad date. I didn't see the red flags at first. I guess I didn't want to. His name was Evan, and we met at a friend's housewarming party. He was charming in the effortless kind of way that makes you feel special just by being in his presence. When he smiled at me from across the room, I felt like the main character in a rom-com. We spent the whole night talking, and by the time he walked me to my car, I was hooked. He asked for my number, and the very next morning he texted, "Last night was amazing. Can I see you again soon?" It all moved fast after that. At first, it was perfect. Evan would text me good morning every day, send me playlists he made just for me, and show up with little gifts. A book I mentioned liking, my favorite coffee, even a necklace he said reminded him of me. He made me feel like I was the center of his world. But then, little things started to feel off. The first time it happened, we were at dinner. I had my phone on the table and it buzzed with a notification. "Who's texting you?" he asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "Oh, just my coworker," I said, showing him the screen. He nodded, but his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Later that night, as we walked to his car, he joked, "You don't need to text other guys when you've got me, right?" I laughed it off, thinking he was just being playful. As the weeks went on, his comments became more pointed. "You're really going to wear that out? Why do you still follow your ex on Instagram? Do you even care about this relationship?" Each time, he'd frame it as concern, like he was just trying to protect me or make us stronger, and I wanted to believe him. He made me feel so special most of the time that I ignored the creeping doubt in the back of my mind. Then came the night I couldn't ignore it anymore. We were at his apartment watching a movie. I was scrolling through my phone during a slow scene when Evan suddenly reached over and grabbed it out of my hands. "Why are you always on this thing?" he said, unlocking it with my passcode, something he had memorized weeks ago without asking. "Evan, give it back," I said, trying to stay calm. He scrolled through my messages, his jaw tightening. "Who's Mark?" I froze. Mark was a friend from college, someone I barely spoke to anymore. "He's just a friend," I said. "You know that." Evan laughed bitterly. "Yeah, right. You think I'm stupid? I see the way guys look at you." I reached for my phone, but he pulled it away. "You don't get it, do you? I'm trying to protect you. Guys like this, they don't care about you. They just want to take you away from me." His words sent a chill down my spine. I'd seen flashes of this possessiveness before, but never this intense. "Evan, you're scaring me," I said quietly. For a moment, his expression softened. He put the phone down and reached for my hand. "I'm sorry," he said. I can't lose you. You're everything to me." I stayed that night, even though every instinct told me to leave. The next morning, I woke up to find Evan sitting at the kitchen table with my phone in his hand. "I went through your photos," he said without looking up. "What?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't hiding anything. And you weren't. I was right about you. You're perfect." Something in the way he said it made my skin crawl. That was the last straw. As soon as I got home, I texted him. "I can't do this anymore. Please don't contact me." Evan didn't take it well. He called me dozens of times, left voicemails ranging from pleading to furious. He showed up at my workplace once, claiming he just wanted to talk. But the worst part was the letters. Every few days, I'd find a new one in my mailbox, filled with rambling declarations of love, apologies, and threats. "If I can't have you, no one else will," one of them said. I filed a restraining order after that, and thankfully the letters stopped. Looking back, I see how the red flags were there from the beginning. The intensity, the possessiveness disguised as care, the little comments that chipped away at my independence. Evan wasn't the man I thought he was, but I was lucky. I got out before things could escalate further. If there's one thing I learned, it's this. Listen to your gut. Red flags don't wave themselves for no reason.